I'm an architect, so I respond better to images than words sometimes. So I found your the film that you just showed us really like a really clear depiction of what was going on in the Niger Delta. I'm just wondering how long you were there, and also since you saw all the layers of problems that the oil has brought to this region, is there a way that, say, some other part of Africa where another oil, say, reserve has been found is about to... I'm originally from Uganda. I know they found oil there at the border between Uganda and Congo, and everyone can see this big disaster about to happen, but it's probably in motion already. I was wondering, what can you do with everything that you've discovered? Like, is there a way to prevent something from happening? Are there lessons you've learned that could... And is there a way to prevent this from happening again in other regions?
Yeah, well, I wish I had the answer to that. I mean, I'll venture, but maybe he might... well, I spent 3 years working on this project in the Niger Delta, maybe about 5-6 months in the field cumulatively over that period of time. I mean, I think that's why civil society is so important, that if you have... that's, I think, what's so difficult about many of the places where oil, ironically, like in the Gulf, the Arab Gulf, it's probably they've benefited the most from oil. Somehow, because they're homogeneous, small countries with a massive amount of wealth. Nigeria has more than 25 languages and ethnic groups. It's so fractured, so it's an artificial construct, quite frankly, of the British colonial period. So it's so hard to bring them together on anything in a way. And then when something like oil is introduced, it's just things go wild. So I mean, in the case of Uganda or other countries where oil is new, the key really is to have the foundations for some sort of civil society, so that then, as the profits come in, they're used in such a way that benefits the people. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of. I mean. There are organizations like Open Society Institute, Revenue Watch here in New York, Oxfam, many different organizations, NGOs, that are trying to work in these countries to facilitate civil society, transparency, to develop a culture, if you like, or an ethos of well, look, we're corrupt here too. I mean, but we have these incredible mechanisms, ultimately, that win. That ultimately survive all the corruption, and that's what we need in these other countries. But quite frankly, my answer to you is find something other than oil. Really.
But it's not my...
No, I know, but I mean, ultimately, the answer to all this is to be able to leave oil behind and come up with some other renewable, clean source of energy. I mean, quite frankly, oil is not sustainable. It's just not sustainable,
Well, one of the problems... Oh, go ahead.
No, I guess it's easy to say that, but the reality is that they have found oil, and the government's interested in oil, and it brings a lot of money. Like it's almost like the same thing.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So I just wonder, with you have the New York Times behind you, National Geographic. Like, is there a way to prevent this happening again with everything that you? I mean, it's the same question again, but
Well, I think Ed mentioned transparency, and transparency operates on kind of like many sides. It operates on our side over here, with companies over here publishing the payments that they make and publishing their contracts, so that people know, okay, these are fair contracts. And that people also know, and this is the amount that's being sent over to our governments. And then transparency on the other side, with governments themselves publishing what they are receiving. And then once you have those kinds of structures in place, then it becomes much more difficult to steal money. And it also becomes much more easier for populations to kind of look at how the money is being spent, to make sure that it's being spent well, not on one-off projects, etc. So these are things that are very valuable in a country like Uganda, which is fairly open, has a much better chance than, let's say, Equatorial Guinea, which is a country that I went to and got expelled from after just 8 days, because it's a total dictatorship and there is no real transparency there. So there are things like that, and one of the other things too is that one of the problems with oil is, particularly if it's found in a country that doesn't have much of a diversified economy, is that it comes to dominate the economic and political system. And due to kind of all sorts of macroeconomic reasons, farming and manufacturing sectors can very quickly atrophy when a lot of oil money flows in. And one other kind of structural problem of oil, and this is unrelated to the issues of corruption or dictatorship, is that it doesn't generate many jobs. It's a capital-intensive industry that doesn't generate a lot of jobs. So you have a kind of a paradoxical problem. In countries like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or really all over, they have severe unemployment problems. And one of the ways that it kind of was dramatized for me is, when I went to Equatorial Guinea before I got kicked out, I was able to visit Marathon natural gas facility, $1.5 billion that they were building. And there were like 1,000, 1,500 construction workers on the site, managers as well. All the managers were from Texas and Oklahoma. Okay, that's normal in the oil world, let's say. But the remarkable thing was that on this massive construction site, all of the workers, the guys who were pounding nails, who were doing the welding or whatever, they weren't from Equatorial Guinea. They were from India, they were from the Philippines. And the manager of the construction facility who toured me around said, look, it's cheaper for us to bring these guys in. They have experience. We don't have to train them. They live on the construction site. They work 7 days a week. They know what they're doing. It's easier this way. The food that they ate was brought in. It wasn't brought in. It was brought in by boat. It wasn't brought in from the local economy. The timber they used was brought in by boat, not from the local economy. Even we were driving around on these dirt roads that were kind of demarcated by rocks that were painted yellow. And I said, what about the paint on the rocks? And he said, we import that. And I said, well, what about the rocks? And he then said, well, those are local rocks, but it would be cheaper for us to bring it in ourselves. So even if Mother Teresa were the president of Equatorial Guinea, and she's long gone, and she's not going to be, and it doesn't have a president like that anyways, she would have a hard time turning oil into jobs, which is what really kind of economies and people need.
I have a question. Sorry.
Can we go to...
I just came from seeing a film down the street. And before the main film, they had a short film on Nigeria. And as the place of identity theft, where Nigerians are causing great harm to Americans, ripping Americans off, and you hear a lot about that. I haven't seen any short films when I went to see a major film about Nigerians not having water or not having basic needs. In Saudi Arabia, they may have some problems, but I think they have basic needs. Some of the money has gone to, I mean, they're concerned with their image in Saudi Arabia. It seems in Nigeria they're not concerned with their image. And I would think then that the oil companies could put pressure on the government. I don't think the oil companies are over here and the government over there. I think they collude. And could not the oil companies put pressure on the government to at least see that some of the basic needs of the people are met?
You know, I think it's very hard for the oil companies to take on that responsibility, and to some degree, I think they've tried to do that at times, but ultimately, that's not their responsibility. You know, I think the amount of profits they make, I don't know what you think, but I think
that ultimately, yes. You know, oil companies cannot be a substitute for governments. They can't be a substitute for city councils, and they shouldn't be, because, you know, decisions on schools and decisions on hospitals, etc., those shouldn't be made by oil companies deciding where to build them and how to build them, etc. And in fact, when they do it, they don't do a terribly good job. When I was in Nigeria, I went to this one kind of Chemkin village almost that Shell had pretty much built. It had built a little medical clinic. It had kind of built some paths between various parts of the village. And it even kind of built a water tower, and it had built as well electrical lines. But there was no water because there were no pumps to pump water to this place. There was no electricity because the people weren't connected to a grid. That was the government's responsibility, and the government, of course, didn't do it. And this medical clinic that Shell had built, basically a building, was empty because Shell did not provide, you know, the beds and the medicine, and certainly wasn't going to provide the doctors. And when I asked the Shell officials about that, they said, look, you know, we can't do it all. You know, we can try to do some of it, but we can't do it all. And in some ways that's correct. In some ways it's also an alibi, because I think they can do more. I think they have an obligation to do more. But it becomes very difficult and wrong for kind of an oil company to substitute for a government, and it's a stopgap.
But they know they're dealing with a rogue government.
Yeah.
So well, knowing that, they're exploiting the people.
Yeah.
And could the Americans put pressure on, could something be done? And instead of these films about negating Nigeria and the negative side of it, bringing forth, I didn't even know that next to Saudi Arabia had the largest oil.
I mean, I think with Nigeria, it's an incredibly complicated question, because you have, you know, there are some people in the Niger Delta who want it all shut down, who've just been so damaged by oil, just say shut it down. But there are other people who say don't shut it down, but just let us benefit from it to a greater extent than we